Now, search teams are scouring plots of land with radar equipment in fresh efforts to find Madeleine McCann 18 years after her disappearance. Now, we know that she vanished on a family holiday in Praia da Luz in 2007. She was just 3 years old. A German national, Christian B., who used to live nearby and is a prime suspect, denies any involvement. In a moment, we'll speak to Veronica Lraine, head of features at The Sun. She was there in Portugal just a few months after Madeleine McCann went missing, looking at this story. First, Charlie Hedges, missing persons expert, is with us. Charlie, good afternoon. Police forces, search teams, to ever sort of look at a story and say, well, this is how we deal with a missing person, because each one is different. There are often some similarities, but a case such as this seems to have eluded investigators and searchers for the best part of 2 decades.
Absolutely, yes. With any of these cases, it's critical to get the first response right and do the early work. I mean, what we're seeing now is sort of very much behind the game searching, and making life is very difficult to try for the officers to find anything. But hopefully, this latest drive is backed by solid evidence and to point them towards the right direction and make sure the searches are effective and reveal some outcomes.
Yeah. Do you sense, and you may not be able to comment on this, I don't know, unfairly put you on the spot, Charlie, but do you, when you look back at a case such a high-profile case, and it had, global headlines for weeks, months and years, but in those initial days, was there anything that struck you as remiss in terms of what wasn't happening, that you would expect to happen in a case like this?
Well, the early stages are absolutely critical. I wasn't on the ground at the time, so it's difficult to be precise, but there's been a lot of issues raised around how the family were considered around this and how the initial response was played out. Statistically, most of these cases are abduction by someone known to the child. Stranger abductions, thankfully, are very, very rare. So the early stages is essential to either rule in or rule out the family and friends to make sure they weren't involved, and then you move on. But you've got to have various hypotheses about what may have happened, and to do a thorough search and a thorough interrogation of witnesses and people living in the area to gather the information. If you don't do that, the job just goes on forever.
And I remember, speculation ran wild. It still does. All sorts of theories. Many have led to, legal issues. There's been libel. There's been books written. Goodness me. I mean, the list goes on. I remember the Portuguese police, I'm sure you remember this too, Charlie, were criticised for not updating enough on the story, but of course the Portuguese said, well, we don't do it like that here, and that's fine. That wasn't their method of policing. They don't give an update every couple of days. They might wait a couple of weeks. I mean, you can only imagine in today's climate the criticism the police get for not updating something within an hour, but that was just their way of policing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have to recognise that the responses as you travel around the world are very different in other countries. We are quite good here, that we're reasonably focused on it, and we do have the media engagement. I've worked in many different countries around the world, and you see some very, very different responses in different countries and different attitudes to missing people. Yeah,
and I guess, 2 decades down the line, it can... One would assume, unless there is some sort of grim discovery, then it's really only sort of new intelligence that is going to solve this, and that appears to be where the police are at the moment.
One would presume that they've got there's obviously a reason for why they're doing what they're doing. They've got warrants for it, and it's being considerable amount of money to launch this sort of enterprise. So it's got to have been approved at a very high level. So there must be some good grounds for them doing it. But what they're actually going to find this far on, there's any evidence and remains will be degraded considerably. It's not impossible. They could have information there where they come up with some remnants that are able to link the whole thing together. That's what we hope for, and for the family's sake, we would love it to come to a satisfactory conclusion, or as satisfactory as it can be under the circumstances.
Indeed. Listen, Charlie, thank you for your time. So I really appreciate that. Charlie Hedges, missing persons expert. Let's speak with Veronica Lraine, Associate Head of Features at The Sun. Afternoon to you, Veronica. Good to see you. I mean, you've been a journalist for a long time. Have you ever known a story that has been so constant in the headlines as this? I mean, clearly it's a distressing story. It involves the disappearance of a child who was just 3 years old back then in 2007, but it's never really left the news agenda fully, has it?
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, working on a tabloid newspaper, stories about missing children come in every day, and they never normally make the paper because they're found pretty quickly, and this has just gone on and on and on. I mean, I was covering it back in 2007. I went out to Portugal, and it's just astonishing it's still going nearly 20 years later.
And it, of course, it had, not to in any way sort of cheapen the, because clearly this is about parents who've lost their daughter. I mean, in the ultimate sort of distress and horror that any parent could experience. And of course, to compound it, it's not yet solved. They, I think the McCanns, certainly up until recently, still have lived with that hope that, I know Kate McCann has said quite regularly, I think my daughter is, there's no evidence to the contrary, I think has been her line.
Yeah, I think as a parent, you have to have that hope, don't you?
Of course you do.
I mean,
of course you do.
How can you carry on without it?
But of course, what made this stand out, it wasn't, I suppose, and again, our previous guest, we were just saying, there is no sort of template for these things, that they all happen in different ways. When a child goes missing, Jamie Bulger, when he went missing, we know what, the horrors of what then unfolded. But of course, this had other elements to it, didn't it? It had the sort of, the middle-class families out there by the pool having dinner, a child left solo with siblings in a hotel room, although it should be said all the other children were also left in similar circumstances, because the families said, well, we could more or less see roughly what was going on, but it didn't stop the McCanns coming under suspicion. All manner of horrors have been thrown in their direction over this as well.
Yeah, I mean, what was astonishing is that very quickly the whole nation was behind them, and then very quickly it turned. I mean, when we were out in Portugal, the whole of Portugal were completely anti the McCanns. Everybody thought that they'd had some sort of involvement, which must have been hugely distressing for them.
And of course, everyone became an armchair detective. God knows how many documentaries were made on this, how many books were written. There were libel actions, court cases. They were right, then they're wrong. They appealed this, and this isn't it. Or they're sending some dogs into the back of a car to say, oh, they think they found something. We remember all of that. I mean, it was never ending.
Yeah, and it was in the Portuguese newspapers every single day. I mean, I went out in the October after she went missing, and I was out there until the March, April time, and every single day there was a story about them. But also led by Amaral, who was this policeman in charge who immediately had taken against the McCanns and was feeding all this really vitriolic, awful stuff.
What was behind that? Why would that have been? Because
I think he didn't like the fact.
Senior copper, for God's sake.
Yeah, but I don't think he liked the fact that the English police were involved and everybody had an opinion, and also it didn't look good on them because there were so many failings. The moment she went missing, they didn't close the roads, they didn't do any searches, Interpol wasn't told until 24 hours later. They came under a lot of criticism, and I think this was his way of lashing out. And then he wrote a book as well.
And then he wrote a book, and then wasn't he taken to court for something? I can't remember. There were so many different legal ramifications around this.
It just carries on and on.
But he wrote a book, so he made a few quid out of his book. Obviously, the resort where this happened, it's difficult, but sort of understandably, we're thinking, hang on, this is our trade, this is our area. And it's being completely maligned by this story that no one solved. So there was some local resentment about this.
There was a bit of local resentment. I mean, everybody there hoped that she would be found alive and well. But I actually had been to Praia da Luz prior to Maddie going missing on holiday.
Right.
And when I went there then, it was this bustling, incredibly touristy, full of English families with young children. When I went back, understandably, it was just after this little girl had gone missing, but it was peak holiday time, the beaches were deserted, the restaurants were empty.
Wow.
I mean, you wouldn't, if you had two choices of a place where a girl had gone missing or a place where a girl hadn't gone missing, you'd
so
go there, wouldn't
it
you?
did have a
It
genuine
definitely
effect on
had
the place as well.
Definitely had an effect.
I would
on
imagine that's recovered somewhat.
It has.
Today.
I have been back since, and it is. I mean, it's a lovely place. That's the thing. It's no wonder so many Brits go there on holiday. It's a fantastic place to holiday. I wouldn't say it's completely recovered. Maybe. I think it's still quieter than it ever was.
And there will be tourists that still go to that place and take photos of the apartment. And
I mean, there was Maddie tours. There was coach tours. We saw coach tours of people coming round, stopping outside apartment 5A, everyone getting out, taking pictures, getting back in, going off to the next place.
That's extraordinary.
It was pretty sick.
What do you make of this latest sort of turn of events? I know some of your colleagues from The Sun are literally heading there now as we speak to look at this. There's this German national. This story's been floating around for a couple of years now of this, complete wrong-un, by the way, who's got all sorts of horrendous charges and convictions against him, serving time in prison, due to be released, I think, in September this year. How significant is that to you, as somebody who's covered this story?
Interestingly, when it first came out a couple of years ago, I did think, that's it, that's him. It just made so much sense. He is such a wrong-un. He was in the right place, the wrong place, the right place at the right time. It just seemed to make sense. And he was named out of the blue by the German authorities as well. It was a real surprise. But with his history, it all seems to make sense. And now, you've got 30 equivalent of the FBI out there from Germany using this radar, which I suppose has advanced a lot in the last 18 years. I mean...
do you think that's based on something? We had Dave Wooding in with us a little earlier, and Dave was saying he watched the documentary, the Channel 4 and The Sun kind of, work together on this, and Dave was just speculating that whether, there was things within that made him wonder whether, there genuinely is something new that they are investigating, rather than a sort of a random, we've got some new kit so we can try this.
I think there's been, as we understand it, there was a tip-off to the German authorities. When that was, I'm not quite sure, but with new information. And also, the fact is that he's due to be released in September. Yeah. When he gets out, he's not going to stick around, is he?
Of course he's not.
They're not going to be able to find him. So if new information comes up, they need to act now. It's a sort of now or never situation.
But we have sort of been, maybe not quite in this territory, but there has been lots of headlines, a new lead, new evidence. This could be the moment.
Yeah, I mean, a lake was searched, a dam was searched 2 years ago, and there's been searches since. But I think this is the sort of last roll of the dice for them.
Do you, the McCanns... you don't tend to see them as often being interviewed any longer, for understandable reasons.
Yeah. They need to get on with their lives, and they've got the twins. Maddie would be 21 now, I think it is. Yeah. It's been a long time, and I guess you just don't want to keep getting interviewed about the same things over and over again.
But one would assume that when something as significant as this happens, somebody does go round to their house and have a chat with them and say, look, this is going to happen. Or does that happen independently? I don't know.
I'm sure they're well aware of everything, that's going on.
There is no time scale on these things. They are going to be there for a little while, looking, hoping to uncover some sort of new evidence in some shape or form.
I mean, as I understand it, there's pickaxes and shovels and groundbreaking machinery and everything going on at the moment. They're clearing all the foliage around from an old sort of ruined cottage that was near where Brueckner lived. Yeah. And they're searching round, they're going to be searching round the Ocean Club apartments, and then there's another area, so there's 3 different zones that they're going to be searching on.
But again, I mean, not the most, in the grander scale, not the most important headline, but I guess locals around there will be thinking, here we go again. This is yet again put us under a really negative spotlight.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the last thing they want. I'm sure it's the last thing anybody wants.
Indeed. Veronica, good to see you. Thank you for coming in. Veronica Lraine is Associate Head of Features over there at The Sun. Thank you to her.